trumpet in Zion, Zion. Sound the alarm on the holy mountain. Blow the trumpet in Zion, Zion. Sound the alarm.
They rush on the city, they run on the wall. Great is the army that carries out his word. They rush on the city, they run on the wall. Great is the army that carries out his word. The Lord utters his voice before his army. The Lord utters his voice before his army. Blow a trumpet in Zion, Zion. Sound the alarm on my holy mountain. Blow a trumpet in Zion.
Good morning and welcome to the Confronting Apostasy program. I'm your host, Brian DeLory, and I thank you all for tuning into the program today. And on today's program, I'm going to be bringing you part 2 of the message entitled The Troublemaker. And last night I spoke on this subject, and I'm going to recap a little bit from last night. What I was talking about, first of all, is that Satan is the troublemaker. Satan is the one who brings the trials of life to us. And these trials are designed by Satan to get us off of the Word of God and get us into unbelief. On God's part, God allows the trials to come to teach us and to train us and to ultimately yield the peaceable fruit of righteousness in us. That's what the trials are for on God's side of things. In other words, what Satan means for bad, God turns into good. What Satan means for bad, what God means for our good, is what I should say. And last night I was talking a little bit about the trials of Job and showing you what goes on behind the scenes on a daily basis. We are in a constant warfare with Satan. He's trying to do things to us all the time. And of course, there is something to be said for walking in obedience to God. I do believe that if you walk in obedience to God, your trials will probably be less. But that's not to say that walking in obedience will keep you from having a terrible trial of some kind, whether it's a physical trial or whatever it may be. We still have to contend with Satan in this life and the things he wants to do to us. And so that's what I was talking about last night. And I want to go back today. Oh, geez, I'm not sure where I want to go with this for a minute. I want to go back today and talk a little bit about the trial of Job. Just go over a couple things with you about that. Really, I want to address Job's response to the trials he was suffering. Remember, Job was a perfect and upright man. God said that about him. A perfect and upright man, one who feared God and eschewed evil. And yet Satan came before God and asked him to take away everything that Job had. And God said, he's in your power. And he put limitations upon Satan. So Job's trials came in 2 phases. Number 1, he lost everything, including his children, in the first trial. In the second trial, second phase of his trial, he became really sick with a disease that caused sore boils to break out on his body from the bottom of his feet to the top of his head. And the Bible says he was scraping himself with a potsherd, which is some sort of instrument that sort of a cutting instrument, and he was just scraping himself with that to scrape the boils off. It must have been absolutely horrible. And yet, his response in the trials that God allowed to come upon him, and remember, God did allow it. This is where a lot of people have difficulty. They say, well, why would a loving God do this to a man who clearly, he says, walks in obedience to him and loves him? And again, there are things that God will allow to come into our lives to really to teach us and to train us and to, well, there's lessons to be learned in every trial. I'll put it that way. If you're going through a trial, you should view it as a teachable moment. That's the way that's the only thing I can say. Now, I'm going to share with you, before I do that, just very briefly, that I am in the midst of a trial in my body. In fact, 2 weeks ago today, I was at a doctor, and he went up inside me with a scope, and he showed me himself, so I know, what I'm talking about. There's things that are going on inside of my bladder that look rather ominous. And I've been having problems in this area for almost 10 years. And I really don't know what the outcome will be because there's one more procedure I have to undergo before I get the final word on what it is, because the doctor is suggesting that it's cancerous. And, it's a scary thing to go through, but yet at the same time, I am totally trusting God. I've been through so much in my life. I've endured so many things, and most of them not having to do with illness, but other types of problems. But I've seen God move on my behalf time and again, and I don't think anything less will happen this time. It tells us in the book of Psalms, chapter 34, verse 19, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivereth him out of them all. And so I'm expecting total and complete deliverance through the power of God from this affliction, whatever it is, because we're not absolutely certain that it's cancerous, but it certainly is cause for concern in that area. So any of you listening to this, I will hope that you be in prayer for me as I undergo this next medical procedure coming up here shortly. And, of course, I'll keep you all apprised of what is happening in that area. But that's my trial, and I've had many other trials, as I stated previously. But in Job's, the one thing that I wish I could say about myself is that I responded to all my trials the way Job responded to his. And so let's take a look very quickly at Job's response to his trials. We know in phase 1 of Job's trial, Satan came before God and petitioned him to take away everything that Job had. And he said, because you've hedged him about on every side and kept him from adversity, this is my paraphrase, but put forth your hand now and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. Did Job curse God to his face when everything was taken away from him? No. On the contrary, Job said that blessed be the name of the Lord. The Lord has given and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He did not curse God in that phase of his trial. And then we have the second phase where Satan comes before God again. Now he's already tempted and tested Job very intensely and didn't get the result he thought he would. So now he says, touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. So God says, more or less, go ahead. He's in your power, but spare his life. So you notice in phase 1 of the trial, he allowed Job to take away everything he had, including his 10 children, but he put limitations on Satan. And he said, don't touch him. You can touch all that he has, including his children, but put not on upon himself, put not forth thine hand. In the second phase of the trial, God says, okay, you can touch him, but you can't kill him. And that's really what Satan was looking to do. Now Job is stricken with these sore boils from the sole of his foot to the top of his head. And he says he took a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. And then his wife said unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. And he says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaketh. What, shall we receive good at the hand of the God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. So once again, Satan was wrong. Job didn't curse God. In fact, again, he defended God. He stood up for God and said, we receive good from God, but shouldn't we receive evil as well? But what he didn't know, he couldn't read the book of Job to find out that it was Satan who was really doing all this to him. You say, yeah, but God allowed it. Well, God allowed it for his purposes. He had a higher purpose in all this. And, of course, we see that Job didn't curse God, and then he had three friends, and they all came to him and supposedly to comfort him. And when they came to him, he was in such bad shape. It says, and when they lifted up their eyes afar off, they knew him not. They lifted up their voice and wept, and rent every one of his mantle, and sprinkled dust upon his head toward heaven. And so they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days, 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great. So this was a very intense trial. Intense. I mean, you and I have been through things in our lives that probably pale. We thought were the worst thing that you've ever experienced, but they probably pale in comparison to this. Consider the fact that in Job's day, there were the advancements in medical science we now have had yet to take place. So, you didn't have the painkillers. You didn't have the antibiotics. I mean, you didn't have the option to go to a doctor and be treated. So, for the most part, even when you get very sick today with the worst of diseases, there are at least some options available to you to help you with pain and to, at times, actually cure the disease. And then I thank God for that. But in Job's day, there wasn't none of that. And number one, he had lost everything he had, which probably, compared to everything that he was going through, losing all of his worldly goods and possessions, meant very little. But he was probably in great grief as a result of what happened to his children, because he lost all 10 of his children. Yet his response, I repeat, was one to bless God, not to curse God. And then when his friends came to visit him, he was in such poor shape that he was barely recognizable. And they sat there for 7 days, and they didn't say anything to him because they saw he's probably a lot of pain, physically and emotionally. And then finally Job broke, as we all do, because we're all human and we can only take so much. And Job started in verse 1. You can find this in verse 1 of chapter 3. It says, he opened his mouth and cursed his day. And Job spake and said, let the day perish wherein I was born, in the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived. Let the darkness shine, let that day be darkness, let not God regard it from above, neither let the light shine upon it. Let darkness and the shadow of death stain it, let a cloud dwell upon it, and let the blackness of the day terrify it. And as for night, let the darkness seize upon it, let it not be joined unto the days of the year, let it not come into the number of the months. Lo, let that night be solitary, let no joyful voice come therein, let them curse it that curse the day, who are ready to raise up their mourning. And then he went on and on. I'm not going to read all this. He began to question why didn't I die from the womb? I mean, why did the knees prevent me? In other words, Here I am in all this suffering. Why was I born? What was the purpose? Just for me to go through this? How many times have you and I said things similar to that in the midst of great adversity, like Job was suffering? And again, like I say, compared to what Job was suffering, how many of you have lost 10 children in one day? Now, of course, it doesn't matter if you have 10 or 1 or 2. If you lose them in one day, it's a terrible thing. I just can't imagine how hard that must have been for Job. And Job just, he finally broke. And then his 3 comforters began to upbraid him and start telling him different things. And that I will go into tomorrow's program because I'm out of time. And so tomorrow will be part 3 of the Troublemaker. And the thing I want to do is summarize right now that the purposes of the trials God allows you to go through are, from Satan's standpoint, to destroy you, and from God's standpoint, they are to help you and to instruct you. And you learn a lot in trials. And like I said, you should view every adverse moment that you encounter as a teachable moment, because God will teach you in those situations if you allow Him to. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and close out the program. The website for the program is confrontingapostasy.com. And that's going to do it for today. And as always, before I leave the air, I leave you with this reminder to keep the faith and defend the truth. Have a good night, everybody.
The trumpet in Zion, Zion, sound the alarm on the holy mountain. Blow the trumpet in Zion, Zion, sound the alarm.
They rush up the city, they run on the wall. Great is the army